Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full review for you on the Tier 10 American turreted tank destroyer. It is the T10E4. The T10E4 lacks none of the punch that you'll be accustomed to with the other Tier 10 155mm guns, but it has the luxury of a fully traversable turret. This vehicle also isn't the slowest of the Tier 10 tank destroyers, so you have the mobility to be able to get around the battlefield fairly quickly. And when you get there, you're still packing that full tank destroyer punch. If that sounds like the vehicle for you, stick around. I've got some ace tanker gameplay coming right up after I give you a full rundown of the statistics and show you how the vehicle stacks up compared to its closest competition. And if you have no interest in picking up one of these tanks, then I'll show you some of its key weaknesses and how to take it out effectively on the battlefield. The T10E4 is not to be confused with the T10E5, which is an American Tier 10 heavy tank, and its tank destroyer counterpart, the T10E3. While the T10E4 and the T10E3 are visually similar, the key difference between the vehicles is that the T10E3 has no traversable turret, which you do have on the T10E4. So let's see how the E4 stacks up compared to the E3, and also I'm throwing in the E100 here. And while it isn't a tank destroyer, that's because I feel that the E4 kind of blurs the lines between a heavy tank and a typical TD. So firepower, one of the key statistics that you would want to be exceptional in a tank destroyer, but unfortunately the T10E4's damage per minute is rather disappointing. It's just over 2,300. That's nearly 350 less than the T10E3 without the turret. And when we compare it to the Tier 10 German heavy tank, well, it's barely any more. And this is while the E4 has the standard 750 alpha damage that you'll be accustomed to on 150 or 155mm main armament. Its rate of fire is barely over 3 rounds a minute, and this can mean that the T10E4 just gets out-traded, both by other Tier 10 tank destroyers who have the same caliber gun but just fire faster. In the case of the E3, half a round a minute extra, but it can be incredibly annoying when you're fighting medium tanks, for example. They're firing 2 or 3 rounds for every time you fire, giving each shot that the E4 fires crucial significance, and one miss can spell absolute disaster for the vehicle. One thing that is awesome about the T10E4 is it doesn't lack that Tier 10 tank destroyer penetration. 295mm on its standard rounds, that's more than enough to get through the front of any vehicle in the game. And it certainly is one of the key differences between the T10E4, for example, and the E100. And while the E100 of course does get those absolutely fantastic heat rounds with 334mm of penetration, just wait till you see these APCR rounds on the E4. We're talking about 375mm of penetration, and your shell velocity is nearly double that on the premium round on the E100. And these monstrous APCR rounds on the T10E4 just open so many opportunities to contest some of the thickest armor in the game. Let's take a look at how 375 would work against this mouse, for example. All along this part of the vehicle, you're pretty much a 50-50 to be able to go through. And through the upper plate here, you're better than a 50-50 to go through. They really do come in handy for countering some of the super heavy armor buffs we've seen to some of the vehicles recently. But it's not only the APCR rounds that are kind of special on this tank. Take a look at the high explosive rounds. Your alpha damage goes up from 750 up to 1,100, and your penetration is still 90mm. The high explosive rounds on Tier 10 tank destroyers are one of the most underestimated tools at their disposal, and strategic use of this ammunition can swing the battle in your favor or just purely add to your damage total. So now on to gun handling, and this is where the T10E4 really suffers due to its semi-traversable turret. 2.9 seconds aim time, worse than the E3, same as the E100. 0.37 accuracy at 100 meters, worse than the E3 but better than the E100. Its dispersion values slightly better than the E3 when moving, but look at the turret traverse dispersion. It is 0.24. This reticle just blooms whenever you turn the turret. That's something that doesn't happen when you use the turret traverse on the E100. This dispersion can just be so frustrating and not give you the opportunity to fully aim at your opponent, and then you might miss, and then you have the awful rate of fire to wait and wait and wait, or give them the advantage to attack you. And when you combine this with fairly poor gun elevation of 12 degrees and a disappointing 6 degrees of depression, which is 2 degrees worse than the E3 and even 1 degree worse than the E100, well, it's certainly not looking fantastic for the E4. So now onto the mobility, and this is where the vehicle does shine in comparison to the E3 and the E100. 35 kilometers an hour forwards, 10 kilometers an hour backwards. That's 2 better than the E3, which is significant, but 5 worse than the E100, so don't expect this thing to be able to reverse like a heavy tank. The power to weight ratio, it's okay, 13.67. This isn't going to be getting you around the battlefield blazingly quick, but at least it's better than the E3. And the ground resistances, while they are better than the E3, they're certainly not exceptional and way worse than the E100, for example. One thing that is lovely about the T10E4, however, is the tank traverse is actually 26 degrees a second. That's better than the E100. And while the turret traverse is 18 degrees a second, slightly worse than the E100, when we add these two things together, the vehicle can quickly get its gun on target, which is especially useful in close quarters situations. Something that the T10E4 just simply can't do, as its turret is locked in place, and it can only traverse the gun 8 degrees to the left and 8 degrees to the right, unlike the 90 degrees to the left and 90 degrees to the right that the T10E4 is capable of. Now onto the armor of the T10E4, and this is where the vehicle looks fairly impressive, at least frontally, right? 260mm at the front of the hull, 203 on the front of the turret, the side of the turret 152, and the rear of the turret 152. Good news, right? 76 on the side of the hull, however, and 38 on the back. That's certainly not such good news compared to the E100, for example. But we're going to have to take a look at the T10E4 in a little bit more detail, and that's because we find that the 260mm plate is only right across the front of the middle of the hull. And take a look at the bottom plate, it's 120mm, and the upper plate here, it's 180. 180 certainly isn't bad, but the lower plate on this tank can feel rather weak indeed. And when you angle the vehicle to the side, well, it's no better news. The lower plate on this vehicle is just really easy to go through. The upper plate, on the other hand, is rather nice, 300mm all across the upper part. So now onto the turret, 254mm of effective armor just because of the spacing to the left and to the right of the gun. That's a little bit disappointing, and this is a good opportunity to be able to penetrate the E4 if you don't have a nice shot on the side of the cheeks, and that's because the cheek armor on this vehicle, there's one tier here that's 240mm effective, and then the tier outside of that is about 280 to 300mm. I must highlight that this is not the same weakness on the T10E4. Look at the T10E4. We're talking about 350 up to 400 on the side of the cheeks. And look at the mantlet on the T10E4. We're talking about 320mm of effective armor up to 600. But there is one thing that should be staring at you right now that is really obvious, that is probably one of the most frustrating aspects of this vehicle, and that is this gun turret that's on top of the tank. It has 152mm of thickness, and its effective armor never really gets over 200 to 225. This is one of the easiest things to penetrate, and this really can be the Achilles heel of the T10E4. And there's one thing I must stress: don't think this is the same on the T10E4. It's 275mm of impact armor here, which is about 330 along the lower part to 375 along the upper part. You just can't go through that machine gun port frontally unless you're firing ultra high penetration premium rounds, probably on tier 10 tank destroyers. But as I highlighted, that certainly isn't the case on the E4, and if you do engage one of these tanks, just shoot here, and the E4 is likely to get very salty very quickly. One thing to watch out for on the T10E4 is this huge area on the back of the tank here. It just sticks up. It's only 76mm thick. It's one of the easiest things to hit and penetrate. If you do angle your armor to the side on the T10E4, keep in mind that your opponents can shoot into this even if you have this part of your hull covered. And don't ever give your opponents the rear of your vehicle, because this 38mm of armor is one of the easiest things for high explosive rounds to go in. Health-wise, the vehicle's hit points are a standard 2000. Not too bad for a tier 10 tank destroyer, although it's 50 less than the E3 and 700 less than the E100. And furthermore, the view range on this vehicle isn't half bad, 390 meters. That means that if you do choose to use some kind of view range amplifying effect on this vehicle, you can still spot for yourself fairly effectively. Now let's talk about equipment on the T10E4. Firstly, take a large caliber tank gun rammer because you want to fire 10% faster, right? Next, I feel there are 3 competitive modules that you want to assign to your 2 slots left, or at least make a choice between the 3 for those 2 slots. You could take an enhanced gun laying drive, and that's because the aim time on this tank, even with fairly good crew skills here, is 2.72 seconds. So a gun laying drive might push that down to a point where at least you don't have to spend forever aiming and then maybe missing. Next, improve ventilation. It will improve your crew skills by 5%, which pretty much makes every aspect of your vehicle 2.5% better. I personally like vents, and I do take them on the T10E4. And the final option, I guess, would probably be extending your view range. range. I quite like coated optics on this tank. I want to be able to poke out round the corners, spot my opponents, fire quickly and then pull back. And I personally feel that the T10E4 is not really suited as much to the binocular telescope, but if you truly want to play this vehicle as a long-range tank, then of course there's nothing stopping you. Next up, commander skills. Of course you want to be taking repairs first, then you want to take 6th Sense. Then when you reach your 3rd skill, you want to be retraining to have 6th Sense, Brothers in Arms, and repairs again. Then I personally think you should be trying to buff your view range as much as possible, take situational awareness, take recon. Those skills would be great and allow you to spot your opponents at further distances. For your gunner, of course, you want to be taking repairs first. This is a tier 10 tank and nothing is more frustrating in the T10E4 than being tracked for long periods of time. Next, crew skill wise, I like to be taking snapshot to try and get down that dispersion when you're turning the turret, which is really bad on this vehicle. Of course, take Brothers in Arms when you can do so across all of your crew, and probably also take the Armorer skill on this tank, because a lot of people just shoot you in your gun. Your gun is large, it always gets up in the face of your opponents, and it quite frequently gets damaged. But then again, this skill is worse than ever, considering now you can reuse your repair kits in World of Tanks, so you might want to take something like Designated Target instead. Driver-wise, it's a similar story. Take repairs first, then I recommend clutch braking to be able to improve your traverse speed. Then I'd try and focus on things like off-road driving. And if you do have an exceptionally skilled crew, you might want to take preventative maintenance on this vehicle, because the chance to be set on fire with an engine impact is 20%. The T10E4 uses 2 loaders, which gives you more than enough opportunity to distribute the skills and the perks between both of them. I do recommend getting safe stowage on one of your loaders as soon as possible, as the T10E4 is very liable to ammo rack damage. But you know what? I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's get stuck into some gameplay. So here we go, we're rolling out on Tundra in one of Wargaming's new -2 matchmaking for tier 10, which is absolutely delicious when we think about it. 3 top tier vehicles on either side, and one of them is a self-propelled gun. Now the T10E4 isn't really the best tank for taking self-propelled gun hits, especially if they splash anywhere near the really weak rear armor of this vehicle. You're going to be in tons of trouble. And it is kind of a matchup. The T10E4's armor isn't really too bad. Remember what I was telling you about having to hide the machine gun or this cannon port on top of the vehicle, which has got about 225 millimeters of effective armor. The whole of the lower plate about 180, in that kind of area, especially if you're angling it. Some parts better than others. So those weak points aren't necessarily, should we say, catastrophic against tier 8 tanks as they would be against your tier 9s and tier 10s. Now I'm going to be pushing down the west of this map. I want to be quite aggressive. I want to go get stuck in. I've noticed that T44 doesn't even have the top turret because he only has 1,200 hit points, and I believe a T44 is meant to have 1,300. Anyway, there you go. He sticks the whole of his tank out round the corner. We get spotted and we remove pretty much most of his life force in this game. 858 damage done. That was a nice roll, way better than the 750. And whenever I see 850, do you know this tank used to have 850 alpha damage way back? But I won't get too distracted there. So we push through, we take down the T44, and we turn our attention to the Revelarice. And I'm very confident here. I'm thinking, let's kill all the tier 8s. I tried to ram him to take his tracks off. But now you're going to see that you should never be overconfident in the T10E4. Look how slow we are to reverse. And we can't turn our turret the whole way. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to feature this replay so much, is this will show you just how awkward a fight will be in your T10E4 if you allow your opponents to be able to get around you like that. And I probably would have been able to survive that situation without the T25 pilot, but he certainly did help me get through it. Furthermore, we get hit by the ST1 and we lose our ammo rack. We put it back in with our repair kit, though. Certainly to watch out for that with this vehicle. This is really the stereotypical E4 gameplay. Go around, shoot things, have awful aim time, but fairly nice alpha. Wait a long time to be able to fire your next shot. Have the flexibility you need to be able to go anywhere, fight anything, do anything. Oh, there's one thing I should highlight is look what I'm loading right now. A high explosive round. Yes! No! 1,075 damage, and that was a low roll. Pretty much 50% of the time we should have killed that STA-1, but he just manages to survive it. Nevertheless, 1,075 and not having to pay an astronomical sum to do so, as you would, for example, in the FV215B183, is really nice. And we load an AP, I believe, there to go and finish off that E4. And we pick up our 3 kills, 3,800 damage in the start of this game, although it has taken us 3 minutes to be able to do so. So while we're moving around here, do get an idea of what the kind of mobility of the E4 is. It's certainly not bad, is it? It's kind of moving it around as if it was one of the slower tier 10 heavy tanks. A bit like if it was the E100 or the IS-4. Those kind of vehicles. It's certainly not like the faster Chinese tier 10 heavies, and it is significantly slower than the E5 as well, at least with regards to its power to weight ratio and its ground resistances. So I'm trying to go around the back here to go and fight the T49. You see that I pinged the map to ask my allies to go and flank round the other way, but they seem to want to come and form a lemming train. Nice shot there into the T49. Quite hard to hit those ones on the move with the long aim time, mediocre accuracy with this vehicle. But we use our mobility to be able to get away from the GWE-100. And you'll notice that even though he doesn't hit anywhere near the vehicle, he still does 105 damage. And that's because of the weak rear armor that I was talking about. And if you do get an opportunity when you're fighting one of these tanks to use high explosive on the rear of the vehicle, you are certainly going to be taking them down very quickly. Nevertheless, with that shot into the T49, we're now up to 4,700 damage and 3 kills. Not too bad, and I'm pretty happy that I cut through that flank as quickly as I did, because now it allows me to turn around and assist the tier 8 vehicles that are towards the northeastern part of this map, because if we were to leave them alone against the Jagdpanzer E100, that Leopard 1, the Emil 2 sitting on top of the hill most likely with his 12 degrees of gun depression, fantastic turret armor and 120mm autoloader, they wouldn't be too well. Oh, hello there, Mr. Patriot. Will we be able to find the shot into his turret? Oh, it just goes a little too high. And that's where the E4 just is not exceptional, really. You see that whenever we turn the turret, the bloom is significant. Whenever we go forwards, the bloom is still fairly significant. Not as bad as it could be. It's really when you turn the turret on this tank that it's absolutely horrific. You do feel like you're spending quite a long time aiming, trying to find the shot. Found the shot onto his tracks. That was a high explosive round there. 407 damage and also locking down the tracks of the Emil too. You'll see why I do like to take a few high explosive rounds in this tank. And in retrospect, I wish I took a few more. And I think in the future, I took a more weighted high explosive loadout on this vehicle. Leopard, no. Do you see how inaccurate that was there? That was a little bit chancy. I think I should have hung around for a little bit longer to be able to aim that shot in. But remember, every second that I'm still, that's an opportunity for the artillery to be able to gun me down right now. Yeah, our armor holds up. 1,500 damage blocked so far. I think you're seeing that as long as you do keep your frontal armor towards your opponent, this vehicle is rather fat, especially along that upper plate. And that's one of the reasons why I really like to try and rush my opponents in this tank. Remember that the whole of the mid plate on this vehicle is about 260mm of raw armor. And the whole of the upper plate, we're talking about 300 effective, 350 effective. And so if you can get up in the face of your opponents in this tank, you're going to be doing exceptionally well. But just keep in mind that if they do shoot to the left or the right of your mantlet, that it is going to be rather bad, as it's only 250mm of spaced armor with no raw armor behind it. Now we're going to be able to hopefully sneak up behind these vehicles, but that Jagdpanzer E100 is rather alarming. All he has to do is roll slightly high, although a quick zoom out there and we can see that he is not looking my way, and in fact he decides to slip his way down the slope, which will allow me to pick up a nice easy kill on the Patriot. Got to watch out though, that Emil 2 with his autoloader, if he does manage to get behind me, he's going to be taking me down very quickly indeed. So I reverse up. I think that he's going to try and flank around to the left. That's why I over-angled my armor there. Have a little bit of a wiggle, but oh gosh, my lower plate not doing very well against the Emil 2 there. As we can see, nice, easy. He's put 2 gigantic frontal exhausts through my tank. And you'll notice that I'm reloading again because I was putting in a high explosive round to finish off the very low hit points on that Emil. Now we're going to be loading an armor piercing round to hopefully finish off this tier 10 German dog. Pause it too early, tank destroyer. And there we go. Top gun, 6,000 damage. Not too bad. And this really was a textbook example of the strengths and the weaknesses of the T10E4. So this was an ace tanker in our T10E4, a high caliber for that 6,018 damage that we dealt, a top gun for our 6 kills, and I think we only fired armor piercing and 1 or 2 high explosive rounds this game, which means that we still make 30,000 credits profit. Our armor held up well when we were keeping our front to our opponents, 1,500 blocked, which certainly kept me in the game and allowed me to get through this one. So the T10E4, do I think it's an amazing, utterly incredible, fantastic killing machine? Well, not really anymore. When this tank first came out, it had 850 alpha damage, better dispersion values, better frontal armor than it has now. It was an utter monster and arguably probably the best tank in the game, full stop. However, Wargaming nerfed it dramatically in conjunction with changing all of the alpha damage of the tier 10 tank destroyers from 850 down to 750, and since it's still been good, but it's just never really sparked my interest. The best things about the T10E4 is that you can go everywhere, you can do everything, and when you go there you've got enough alpha damage and fantastic penetration to contest against anything. But I would argue that to gain this flexibility with a semi-traversable turret while retaining many of the raw characteristics of a tier 10 tank destroyer with regards to its penetration and alpha damage, it just has to sacrifice so much DPM, so much aim time, and even quite a lot of the armor. And this means that the vehicle isn't quite a heavy tank and it isn't quite a tank destroyer, it's kind of a hybrid. And for many players that will be immensely comforting, and they'll find that the T10E4 will be the tank of their dreams because they're always in the fight. They won't care about the map that they get on, nor the matchup that they're in. They're still going to be able to go in and put 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds of ammunition into their opponents and have a decent game. But be warned, this vehicle is not a specialist and you're going to find yourself in situations where you were just wishing you were in something else. And so hopefully you enjoyed this tank review, or maybe it was just useful to you. If it was, please consider giving it a like, I'd really appreciate it. And use the more info icon if you want to see more awesome T10E4 gameplay on this channel. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the T10E4. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you fear them on the battlefield? Do you look at them as a big tasty snack? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.